the arrival of the guest of honor, Mrs. Josephine Teo, Minister for Manpower and Second Minister for Home Affairs, Singapore. A very good morning, Mrs. Josephine Teo, Minister for Manpower and Second Minister for Home Affairs, Singapore, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman at the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Singapore, Professor C. Rajamohan, Director of ISAS, NUS, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Archana and I have the pleasure of being your MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, in short ISAS, I welcome you to the 13th International Conference on South Asia, titled Politics in a Changing South Asia. To start the proceedings, I would like to invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai to deliver the welcome remarks. Ambassador Pillai, please.
Mrs. Josephine Teo, Member, Minister of Manpower, Second Minister for Home Affairs. Mr. Marigoda, Founder, Path Foundation, and former Cabinet Minister, Sri Lanka. Mr. Shivashankar Menon, former Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor of India. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this 13th conference of ISAS. We have this very regularly every year, and it's well attended, well participated. This year, there's a little bit of a difference because we are going to have another conference a few months down the road in November called South Asian Diaspora Conference. We seldom have back-to-back. But because there were so many functions in Singapore, we had no choice, and we decided to have this back-to-back arrangement. A number of countries in South Asia held their national elections very recently. Incumbent governments in two countries, Bangladesh and India, came back to power with tremendous support, tremendous backing. Other countries like Afghanistan, Sri Lanka are scheduled to have elections soon for their president, and we will also have some excitement at that time. The results of recent elections in Bangladesh and the Maldives and Bangladesh, India, Maldives, and Pakistan are significant for several reasons. Governments in Bangladesh and India and Maldives have overwhelming numbers of new members in parliament. They should create an environment of political stability and provide the governments the legislative space needed to take certain measures. On the other hand, concerns have been expressed by sections within these countries about lack of effective opposition, muscling of press and executive encroachment on established institutions. This is one of the fears expressed. In the case of Pakistan, the fact that there has been a democratic tradition is significant. In itself, significant. This is only the second time in Pakistan history that an elected government have handed over power to our existing elected government. Social media and digital technology helped as well as transform traditional forms of political campaigning. Political parties employed these forms of media with a view towards mobilizing a large share of the population, especially the youth. At a broader level, this reflects the greater reach of the internet across South Asia. Both South Asia as a region and its individual states are witnessing demographic, economic, and technological changes that are impacting upon the political realm. Established political, economic, and social models are increasingly being challenged. South Asia has also not been immune from global political shifts such as the rise of populism and rejection of established political frameworks. Today, we'll have the privilege of hearing about the new political stance, practices, and dynamics emerging in South Asia from a group of eminent speakers from Singapore and South Asia. The annual conference aims to showcase ISA's commitment to keeping abreast of key developments in South Asia that are relevant to Singapore in a particular and to the Southeast Asian region as a whole. Equally importantly, it is an opportunity to gain an in-depth insight into the current state of South Asia. I would like to take this opportunity to especially thank Minister Josephine Teo for being here. She has appeared in some of our other programs, and she's a delightful speaker, very detailed in her analysis, and we are looking forward to it. I'm also very glad to have Mr. Marogora here. We have done some programs together in Sri Lanka, and we are hoping to have a stronger leadership relationship as we go forward. My thanks to Mr. Shivshankar Menon and the others who are participating in this, and I hope you will have a very good morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure now to invite Minister Josephine Teo to deliver her keynote address.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman, Institute of South Asian Studies. Your Excellency, Mr. Melinda Muragoda, Founder, Pathfinder Foundation and former Cabinet Minister of Sri Lanka. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for inviting me to the 13th International Conference on South Asia. The theme of today's conference is politics in a changing South Asia, and how technology is transforming this landscape. It is a timely discussion. In many societies today, divisive discourse exacerbated by the internet and social media have become one of the most intractable challenges. Such discourse now traverses national boundaries with great ease. This has profound implications for politics everywhere. Among the forces that can threaten societal cohesion. Race and religion are probably the most potent. This morning, I would like to share my thoughts on Singapore's multiracial, multicultural, and multi-religious heritage, and what we are doing to moderate the risk that we observe elsewhere. It is my sincere hope that they provide useful references for your discussions today. As many of you know, this year is Singapore's bicentennial. 200 years ago, the British arrived and made it a free port. But in fact, our history goes back much further. It did not only begin in 1819. The island had been inhabited since around the 13th century. But the arrival of Stamford Raffles marked a major turning point in Singapore's engagement with the rest of the world. In the years that followed, many more people came. Along with this came the exchange of goods, international transport, communications, connectivity, and the infusion of different cultures into this small island. Most of the people came in search of a better life. In the beginning, they were mainly sojourners, looking forward to the day when they could finally return home for good. But eventually, many of them, including those from South Asia, chose to settle here instead as laborers, businessmen, professionals, civil servants. Over time, Singapore became their home and where their hearts belonged. They worked hard and contributed actively towards Singapore's early development. One such person was Narayana Pillai, who incidentally arrived in the same year as Raffles. He started work as a government clerk, but later became an entrepreneur and community leader. He is credited with establishing Singapore's first Hindu temple, the Sri Mariamman Temple, which still stands today on South Bridge Road. Another pioneer was Hunma Somappa, a prominent landowner who lobbied the colonial government of his time to make Deepavali, the Hindu festival of light, a public holiday in Singapore. He also started a scheme to provide free cooked meals for the poor at the Sri Krishna temple. In the turbulent years after World War II, one young man who had been born in Jaffna, Sri Lanka, helped to change the course of our history. S. Rajaratnam was a prominent journalist when he co-founded the People's Action Party with Lee Kuan Yew and several others. Together, they led Singapore towards self-government and eventual independence. Rajaratnam became our first foreign minister. To him, we also owe the formation of ASEAN and our national pledge. Just as the bicentennial has brought renewed interest in the contributions of different communities to Singapore over the last 200 years, it has also sparked deeper reflection on our journey from Singapore to Singaporean. In fact, Rajaratnam gave one of the most profound answers to this important question. I don't think at the time that he said this, he was thinking about the journey from Singapore to Singaporean. But if we were to look back and say, what are the answers to this question? What did it take for us to get from Singapore to Singaporean? Then I think one must agree that Rajaratnam gave one of the most profound answers. Because he declared, being a Singaporean is not a matter of ancestry. It is a matter of conviction and choice. Being a Singaporean is not a matter of ancestry. It is a matter of conviction and choice. Rajaratnam may have also been just expressing his own opinion, but as one of our founding fathers, his words carry weight for us even today. For the PAP government, our conviction and choice must always be multiculturalism, to represent everyone who chooses to call themselves Singaporean, regardless of background. This is a country where every language, culture, religion has its place. In terms of ethnicity, Singapore is becoming more diverse, even though Malays, Indians, and Chinese still make up more than 95% of our population. According to a Pew Research Center report, Singapore is the most religiously diverse country in the world. You can see this at our major events, where the interreligious organization that gathers to pray comprises representatives from 10 religions. Regardless of our differences, every Singaporean knows that we want to be one people, one nation, one Singapore. It would, however, be naive to believe that the state of communal harmony we enjoy today is self-sustaining. It had never been so. In the 1800s, to manage the growing disorderliness in our multiracial society, the British implemented a policy of ethnic residential areas. The European town comprised European traders and Eurasians. Present-day Chinatown and the southeastern part of Singapore housed the coolies who had arrived from various parts of southern China. Indians were located in Chulia Kampong, and Malays resided in Kampong Glam. Immigrants identified primarily with their own communities and not with the other inhabitants of our island. From the early 1900s, there was increasing dissatisfaction with the colonial administration and a growing sense of national identity. But I say national very carefully, because at that time there was not such a clear concept of Singapore as a nation, but there was a certain identity that was emerging. And even so, the different races were confronted with the dilemma of identifying with their original homelands or with their new home in Singapore. There were also debates on whether all races had a rightful claim on Singapore and were able to call this land their home. Such divisions did not go away even as we struggled for self-government. In fact, they were played out at different times in the 1950s and 60s, leading to communal riots. Though we have not experienced such incidents in recent years, older Singaporeans can still remember the calamity that follow when racial and religious fervour become inflamed. This is why the Singapore government does not take racial and religious harmony for granted. Multiculturalism is not a state of nature. Instead, it takes unstinting commitment and deliberate interventions to create and to maintain. For example, our policies on urban planning and public housing ensure that we have inclusive neighborhoods. The ethnic integration policy ensures diversity of races down to every block of flats in public housing estates, in which more than 80% Singaporeans live. As a result, no Singaporean goes home to a racial enclave. As children tend to attend schools near their homes, this policy also ensures that all Singaporeans interact with fellow citizens of other races from a young age and feel no discomfort with one another. In fact, the boys in particular, when they serve national service later in life, actually sleep in the same quarters, fight together, train together, and also learn how to fulfill mission-critical objectives together. We teach English as a common language so that different racial groups can communicate effectively with one another. While each racial group continues to study its own mother tongue, a common language promotes interracial understanding. Schools organize activities to celebrate the different racial and religious festivals, as well as a designated Racial Harmony Day, which allows students to gain an appreciation of the cultures of other races and religions. Of course, when the children are supposed to partake in the Racial Harmony Day activities, they also ask their parents, do you have something I can wear, that will spark interest among my friends? And that therefore transmits also to the parents. The parents gain a consciousness that we have to mark this important occasion to do something together. More recently, within neighborhoods, we set up the Interracial and Religious Confidence Circles, or IRCCs, which comprise leaders from local religious and ethnic organizations and the community. These IRCCs help to bridge the differences among the diverse groups and deepen each other's understanding of various faiths, beliefs, and practices. As a young nation, it would be wise for Singapore to treat our communal harmony as a delicate sapling, still needing care and nourishment in order to blossom and at the same time to sink deeper roots. Without such efforts, we cannot prevent racial and religious tensions from rearing their ugly heads and eventually seeping into our politics. This is why we do not take lightly recent developments around the world. In particular, the resurgence of identity politics and divisive sentiments along racial and religious lines is deeply troubling. While the internet and social media have opened up great opportunities for economic growth and development, they are also easily exploited as instruments to sharpen divisions in society. Social media has enabled misinformation to spread rapidly and widely, resulting in greater polarization along our social fault lines. A 2016 Pew Research Center report showed that about half of internet users in the US find political discussions on social media to be less respectful, less likely to be resolved, less civil, and angrier than other places where they talk about politics. These are the kinds of data from 2016. If you fast forward to 2017, has it gone away? I think anecdotal evidence suggests that, in fact, the situation has worsened. Such polarization has erupted into the carnage of violent extremism in the real world. For example, in March this year, a white supremacist attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, during Friday prayers, killing 51 people, of all places, Christchurch, one of the most peaceful cities you can think about. It was later revealed that his activity on social media and online message boards had allowed him to connect and interact with others who shared similar extremist beliefs. He also live-streamed his attack, accompanied by a manifesto to further spread his brand of hate and violence online. Just last month, another mass shooting occurred in El Paso, Texas, killing 22 people. Similarly, the shooter posted a manifesto on an online message board just before the shooting, in which he expressed support for the Christchurch shooter's actions and manifesto. So he was in some ways a copycat and sought to gain further attention. Divisive views also surface in Singapore from time to time. For example, in 2015, there was a teenager then, called Amos Yee, who posted a video full of expletives which contained derogatory and offensive remarks against Christianity. More recently, in January this year, another person by the name of Chen Jianbang scrawled racially charged and vulgar phrases on the walls and in the sheltered walkways near Aljunied MRT and other areas in Geylang, which, as we all know, is a place frequented by members of our Malay community. In both these cases, as well as many other similar ones, the government decided to act quickly. We had to make clear that these actions were unacceptable and initiate criminal investigations against the perpetrators. Amos Yee was eventually charged for wounding religious feelings and publishing an obscene image, and given a 4-week jail sentence. Chen Jianbang was charged with vandalism and for wounding racial feelings and given a 13-month jail sentence and 9 strokes of the cane. Community and religious leaders, as well as ordinary Singaporeans, also denounced their actions and affirmed the importance of respecting all races and religions in Singapore. These reactions demonstrate the seriousness with which we as a society treat our racial and religious harmony. I must, however, make clear that the government does not seek to suppress discussion and debate on race and religion. On the contrary, we do not pretend that race and religion no longer matter. But the discourse must be conducted with mutual respect for each other and in ways that are sensitive to each other's feelings. These principles must underpin all such engagements. At the same time, we must safeguard our status as a secular democracy. Singapore upholds the separation of religion and state. This means that the government, in policy and in law, does not favor or endorse one religion over another. Likewise, religion does not influence government decisions. This does not mean that government has no role in the matter of religion. Government plays a major role in ensuring that there are common spaces where people of all religions can interact and communicate equally without the denigration of other religions, which could foment distrust, hatred, and violence against other religions. To preserve these principles, we regularly update our laws. Earlier this month, the Ministry for Home Affairs tabled amendments to the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, or MRHA, in Parliament. The MRHA plays a key role in providing clear standards of behavior to maintain religious harmony, so that such common spaces are protected. I won't go into the full details of the MRHA amendments here, but I thought it would be useful to just highlight one key change to keep it relevant to the digital age. The MRHA allows government to issue a restraining order on anyone that threatens religious harmony. Currently, it requires a 14-day notice period to be given. This provision was not an impediment to timely response 30 years ago when the MRHA was first enacted. However, in present times, the battles to counter hate and violent extremism on cyberspace are won or lost in minutes and seconds. 14 days in the physical world is a century in the cyber world. One of the key changes is therefore to allow restraining orders to take immediate effect once they are issued. Each country's experience and context in dealing with diverse discourse in our digital age are unique. Singapore, we have sought to create safe and diverse physical spaces from the start through social and education policies. As we enter the digital age, we recognize that we must also protect digital spaces so that differences can be openly discussed and accommodated, and divisive rhetoric and sentiments do not grow to the point of tearing our society apart. We have done this by updating our legislation to ensure that our digital spaces can be safe and diverse as well. I am aware that given the uniqueness of our circumstances, Singapore's methods cannot be wholly replicated elsewhere. But still, I hope that our experience can be a useful reference point for the discussions today. Let me end by saying that the interconnectedness of our world demands that we think and work collaboratively across borders. It used to be physical borders, but more and more, we must strive to connect across the borders of our cultures, our beliefs, and our minds. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The future depends on what we do in the present." And let this be a call for all of us to act in a collaborative way today, to build a future that remains connected and that is respectful of all peoples and cultures. I wish you success in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I would now like to invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai to join Minister on stage for the question and answer session.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for a wonderful speech. And thank you for agreeing to spare a few minutes for a small interactive session. While they're thinking of questions to ask, maybe you will allow me to ask the first question, and then we can see what others will follow up. Singapore has passed several laws to try and fight the ill effects of digital technology as well as social media side effects. But you yourself in your speech has said cultural boundaries, they are not common, and that it can become very fragile and things can break up. So my question is these laws that we have passed, are they sufficient to make sure that we are able to withstand the onslaught of very negative things that are coming out through social media and digital technology?
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. I was saying to Ambassador earlier today that I don't know what possessed me to say yes to him when he first asked, because
I thought it's natural. Yeah?
It's natural, but it's very hard to say no to him. I think you've asked a very important question. In fact, this question surfaced when we tabled the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act Amendment Bill in Parliament recently. The question was, you've never had to invoke the provisions under this act in the 30 years that you have had it. Is this law still necessary? And why do you even need to update a law that has not been used, has not been invoked? I think for me, and actually for all of my colleagues, including Minister Shanmugam in the Cabinet and also in the Home Affairs Ministry, it is precisely because the law did not need to be invoked that tells us that it has served its deterrent effect. That the provisions have made very clear the boundaries of acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and we have sent a signal that is unequivocal, that if you attempt to cross the line, the law is here to hold you accountable to society. However, I would think that beyond laws, beyond policies, perhaps the most enduring and self-sustaining form of defense has to be the education of our people's minds, in that they become more aware of what social media does to their thinking, does to their behavior, and that they also build up their own defenses against becoming easily influenced and easily manipulated. This is easier said than done, because all of us are on the receiving end of an enormous amount of material that are pushed to us, sometimes, actually most often unknowingly. They are pushed to us, they lure us into echo chambers where our views, right or wrong, are amplified and repeated by people who seem to think like us. And we therefore develop a false sense of how widely held our own beliefs are. And if those beliefs happen to be of the kind that are divisive in nature, then these echo chambers trap individuals without them realizing so, and as a result, the interactions across these echo chambers are few and far between, and each develops firmly held views that become, over time, harder and harder to change. This is what we are trying to guard against. But besides law, besides policies, if we depended only on people being alerted and they did not on their own develop some self-defense mechanisms to guard against these kinds of tendencies, then I think it would be very tough, very difficult. So you have to work on several fronts. There's no single approach that will help to get us to a point where we can maintain this kind of communal harmony.
Would the neighborhood be also a problem area for you as you try to spread what you call multiculturalism?
You mean the physical neighborhoods in our estates, or do you mean
no,
the Singapore, our
region.
regional neighborhood? It is difficult because these views cannot be contained within physical borders anymore. Right. They traverse national boundaries, and very quickly, very easily. I give you an example. Home Affairs Ministry is very cognizant of this. You know, we have very tough drug laws in Singapore. Okay. Within Singapore, you know it. But today, the attitudes towards drug use has changed a great deal. Not so long ago, during the Thai general elections, one political party made the bold promise that if they were voted into power, they would allow every household in Thailand to grow up to 6 pots of cannabis. This news does not stay within Thailand. The moment it is uttered, within seconds it is reported, and anyone in Singapore, if they are so interested, will get to know of it. So what happens then is that there is an impression, therefore, that cannabis can't be a bad thing. After all, also in Thailand, and actually in several other countries, several other states in the US, for example, the use of cannabis has been legalized, or at least considered to be acceptable for medical purposes. The science on this is actually absolutely clear. It is not cannabis that has medicinal properties. It is certain derivatives, a class known as cannabinoids, that has medicinal properties. But the man in the street can't tell the difference between cannabis and cannabinoids. So he thinks, he is sold the impression that cannabis has medical properties. Therefore, the consumption and the growth of cannabis cannot be bad. How can something that have medicinal properties be bad? How can something that have medical use be bad? how can a reasonable government prevent people from accessing something that has got health value? So this kind of ideas, they tread a very gray zone and can be repeated, and to the point that you begin to change your minds and you start to think that perhaps what we are doing is too harsh, too draconian. So not surprisingly, a few days ago, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, the newspapers reported that they found a household where the inhabitants had turned the house into a cannabis farm. So from thought to action, not so far off.
Thank you. I'll open it to the House. Questions? Please state your name and then tell us. Don't make a speech. Please ask a question. Yeah? Yes, that lady.
Hi, I'm with the assignments. Just curious, could the Little India riots have been handled differently? Because there were police vehicles and all that were being overturned, and it's something that I've been curious about. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask a clarification. When you say could it have been handled differently, what did you have in mind?
Something like, you know, like the police side. I understand there were two sides. There were two sides involved, and just really curious.
Which two sides?
I have no idea. But then there is.
It's very hard to answer a question which you have no.
I see.
Like that.
Yes, understand. Just something on my mind. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I would say it was unexpected. And I would say that it made us think a bit harder of how we ought to find ways for growing communities in Singapore to have opportunities to interact with one another and yet also have opportunities to pursue their own interests. Yeah. That enduring value does not change. Yeah. Actually, we had a full inquiry on the Little India riots. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we'd be quite happy to send you a report on that inquiry. What could have been done differently or better, all in that report.
Okay.
I'm sure it's available online too.
Can we take two more questions? Yeah? I think we can take two more questions. Somebody? Yes.
This is not a question as such. What are we going to do about this haze problem that that occurs every year? Two countries, our neighbor, Malaysia, and ourselves, and Indonesia.
You see,
I think
in
it's about.
spite of the haste, we've got a full house.
I think it's about time something positive was done so that this doesn't recur year after year. Thank you very much.
We agree. It, however, I think comes from difficulties that our neighbors experience. Part of it economic in nature, part of it vital commercial interests that are at stake, and also I think an ability and a willingness to enforce. And Singapore is on the receiving end, and what we have to do is to keep engaging our colleagues, our friends, in the countries where the haze originate. And so this dialogue has not ever stopped. And I think what we do in Singapore is to offer practical help. And if our practical help is accepted, we are happy to provide it. And the practical help includes how you can, at the root of it, moderate and eventually eradicate the problem. So we are invested in this process. We need our colleagues to also respond.
I'm getting some instructions. We have another 10 minutes. Is that okay with you? We have 10 minutes, so you can ask more than one question, provided you keep it short and not so vague.
My name is Charles Chow from the East West Group. Good morning. Thank you very much for the nice speech, Minister. My question is on Racial Harmony Day. It's very nice for children to wear clothing and all that. My question now is that the Singapore population is aging. What is your ministry or what is Singapore doing for Racial Harmony Day for the elderly? Question one. Question two is, we have a lot of intermarriages, Chindians and new citizens from, especially, from friends in ASEAN. Racial Harmony Day could actually be also an ASEAN Day, or if you don't mind saying now, why we restrict now to only Chinese, Malay, Indians. So we have to broaden this racial aspect, especially in a multi perspective here in Singapore. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. One of the nice things about Singapore is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, is that we have quite an extensive grassroots movement. And the grassroots movement can be found in every of our constituencies. And in each of these grassroots movement, you'll have the residents committee, you'll have those typically are in the public housing estates, and then for the private and the landed estates, there tend to be what is either known as neighborhood committees or area subcommittees. Not too critical to remember the names of these committees, but to say that there are organizations which comprise mostly of volunteers and who are residents in their respective areas. What you will find is that by its very nature, the residents committee, the neighborhood committees, because they are mainly run by volunteers, quite a lot of the volunteers also include our elderly, our older persons, partly because they have reached a point in their life where they are not so tied up with child raising commitments or with their professional commitments, so they have more time to spend contributing to the community. And so you will find that they are present in many of the social activities that take place in the communities. So although I talked about Racial Harmony Day happening in schools on an organized basis, in fact, all of the constituencies do, in one way or the other, mark Racial Harmony Day. So in my case, for example, I serve in the constituency called Bishan North, and during our Racial Harmony Day, sometimes it is joined up together with an outing that the Residents Committee has organized. Sometimes it is a sports event that the Neighborhood Committee has organized, and then they will find ways to infuse a dimension, that marks Racial Harmony Day. So I hope I didn't give you the wrong impression, Charles, that it's really only in schools that Racial Harmony Day is marked. Suffice to say this, there is this one day in the year, there is this 1 week or so that people know is a time for us to take a step back and reflect on what it means to have racial harmony. It raises the consciousness, but not in a very overt way. It raises the consciousness through social activities, a get together. It can be very low barrier activities. It could be a block of flats deciding that let's organize to mark Racial Harmony Day a potluck. Everybody brings something that someone else can partake in. And then they have a simple party. And a lot of these will involve residents of all ages, not just little children. Certainly, I think the elderly are involved in it. To your second question, in the way in which we describe people's racial identities, it is evolving, and one cannot say in future that there will be no further evolution. It started with only CMIO, and now it has developed to the point where it's quite common. You hyphenate it. You can be Chinese Indian, Indian Chinese. You can be Chinese Malay, Malay Chinese. Will it evolve further? I think these things you have to keep an open mind. It really depends on how society evolves. You are quite right in saying that if you look at transnational marriages today, it's much more diverse and it's much more inclusive also. And with that, the societal norms, the societal expectations, what people are comfortable with, that will also change. So my assurance to you is that I think as long as we are able to pay attention to the changing norms and we keep an open mind and we have this attitude of inclusivity, then I think the evolution will take place in good time. Yeah. Thank you. There's a gentleman now.
Can I mention a personal fact about
Yes,
you?
of course.
Huh?
Yeah.
About you.
Sure. I
You're
don't
the-
know what personal fact it is, but you can.
No, I was asking the minister permission to mention she's an ideal person to talk about racial harmony. She spent a honeymoon in India, not married to an Indian, but married to a Chinese. So she has got the depth in her character to accept that what is not the norm. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Inatullah Khan. I'm chairman of Cosmos Foundation and a member of a Paris-based organization called AAID, Association for Accountability and Internet Democracy. My question to the Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, I see you are having multiple portfolio. Is your law in Singapore about digital security enough, or how challenging you find in this age of what I call online falsehood, whether it's hate speech or fake news? Would you like to, just like to know what's the latest status of the Digital Security Act in Singapore? Thank you.
Thank you. It is a big problem, and it is one that will not go away. In fact, it threatens to worsen. So we have to take some action. As to whether the actions go far enough, only time will tell. What we have done is to study the laws that have been put in place in other countries, whether it's Germany, the UK, other parts of the world. And then we ask ourselves the questions, do these work well in the Singapore context? And one very important factor is also this. We have to do it in such a way as to be clear to our people what we are trying to address. So in our case, it's very clear. It is falsehoods. It is something that is not factual. We are not trying to suppress opinion. Anything that is expressed as a matter of your belief, your preference, your view of the matter, that is not falsehood. If only you stated something that can be factually proven to be untrue, that is what our law seeks to address. And we also decided that we probably have people who are mature enough, and we do want to cultivate a digital, not just digitally literate population, a digitally mature population, so to speak. And so the course of action, the main course of action that we can take under our Prevention of Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, POFMA, as we call it, is the fact that you have to publish a correction. The correction order is, I think, quite unique to Singapore. In other words, yes, in extremis, we may have to order a takedown, but one innovation we introduced in our law is to allow for a correction order to be issued instead. In other words, a falsehood may have been conveyed, but in those instances, we believe, in certain instances, we believe that a correction is a better remedy, so that people can be presented with a fact to counter the falsehood and make their own minds up about whether to believe something. So these are the two important features, I think, of our act that perhaps is a little different from what other countries have set out to do. For us, falsehood very clearly has to be something to do with a fact, and that can also be disproven. And secondly, the innovation, the policy innovation that we introduced in our POFMA is a correction order. Would rather you publish the correction so that people can make up their minds. We think there's value in that, because remember what we started off right at the beginning, that you can have the laws, you can have policies, but perhaps the most self-sustaining form of defense is if people have the awareness and they have the ability to discern. But they will have very poor ability to discern if they didn't get practice, if they didn't have a chance to know what was truthful and what was not. You've got to be able to present both to them, and they see enough examples of this, they will learn when things are said in a certain way, my antenna goes up and I don't quite believe it. That is itself very important. I hope that's helpful to you. Yeah. You need both. Yeah.
One last question. One last question.
For the lady.
Yeah, from the lady.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jacqueline Cole. So as a proud Singaporean, so I have enjoyed the success and goodness of the policies in the politics and policies in Singapore. But what are the changes that we really need to be prepared in this ever-changing military environment that we are also in? Also with regard to the widening income gap, aging workforce, and of course our potential rise of structural unemployment. Thank you.
I'm sorry I missed the last part. Do you mind saying it again?
Okay, structural unemployment. Yeah, the rising of that.
The rising structural unemployment.
Yes, thank you.
Actually, that question itself deserves its own conference, you know. It's rather far-reaching and wide-ranging, but in the limited time we have, I'll take a stab at it, because Jacqueline has asked a question that keeps us awake, not just one night, but many, many nights. What about the future of Singapore? How do we move forward? In fact, yesterday evening I hosted a group of Asian journalists who were in Singapore for a couple of weeks, and they came to visit me at my Meet the People session, and they asked probably the same question. I would perhaps characterize it as follows. If you compare the challenge today to the challenge of the 1950s, 1960s, I think particularly in the years post-independence, I would say that Singapore has arrived at a very high base. Singapore had arrived at a very high base. When we started 50 plus years ago, things were so far behind that no one expected us to succeed. Today, the opposite is true. We've reached such a high base that no one expects us to fail. Both carries its own set of challenges, because when expectations and aspirations have risen to a certain level, we've got to make an effort to understand what they are. It has gone beyond, for example, where the economy and jobs are concerned. It is no longer just employment. It is meaningful employment. It is that I want to do work, not just to bring home the income, but I want to do work that feels to me to be a meaningful contribution to society, that also does good. So what we have to do in this phase is to not try to imagine that the solutions come from one group only. You have to reach out and you have to bring people together and try and get a meeting of minds and to see where the aspirations take us. One very good example, for example, is climate change. It's quite interesting to me how Singaporeans feel strongly about our contribution to managing the difficulties to do with climate change, and how Singaporeans believe that in their own ways they want to contribute to environmental sustainability. So that's a good energy. You want to build on it and you want to take it forward. But in order to do all of these things, in order that we can allow every single individual in Singapore to pursue his aspiration, whether it is to make a contribution towards environmental sustainability or to make a contribution to the arts, the development of our cultural heritage, or to make a contribution in science and technology, or to make a contribution to be part of the entrepreneurship scene in the region. In order for us to do all of these things, there are a few fundamentals that will not change. One, safety and security is fundamental, and we must not believe that on this point we can ever let our guard down. Safety and security is not something that you can afford to say, today society is very peaceful, you don't need to do very much on it, and you can just leave it to autopilot. The economy is also important because whether as individuals or for us as societies, in order to pursue our aspirations, we need resources, and those resources have to come from a thriving economy. So continuing to ensure that there is good economic development, good growth, even though we are already at a very high base, are critical. To Jacqueline's question, you are right to ask about structural unemployment. It is a risk because the future of work is being reshaped very quickly, and it will be very different from what we are used to. The analysts focus very much on the impact on technology, the potential jobs that could be lost, and sometimes they also talk about the jobs that can be gained. But I think one of the things that they always miss is that not just jobs potentially lost and not just jobs gained. Actually, it is all the jobs in between that will have to be changed. That is the part that people don't spend enough time thinking about. We are very invested in this process. We started perhaps more than 10 years ago in realizing that what we had done in pre-employment education, before people entered the workforce, that was good. But equally, we have to build up a continuing education and training infrastructure and framework, because no skill sets that the school provides you at the point of graduation can last you for life in future. Therefore, how do we create a new ecosystem to support continuing education and training? The risks of structural unemployment have not gone away. However, at the moment, we are quite encouraged, because whether you call it structural unemployment or frictional unemployment, our unemployment has been maintained at a stable around 3%. It goes up a little, it comes down a little bit, but it has not gone, except for the global financial crisis after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, except for that period, actually our unemployment has not gone beyond 3.3%. So it's been maintained as such. It did not happen on its own. It means that even people who are displaced from their jobs somehow found a way to get back in. And that's what we have been focusing our attention. A lot of the emphasis through Skills Future, a lot of the emphasis on Adapt and Grow, helping people who may have been displaced find their way back into the workforce. That's the way we deal with structural unemployment. It is hard work. You need to have career coaches, you need to help them to find their new footing, and it's not at all easy, but that's how we've been dealing with it, and that's also how we've been able to keep the unemployment low. So I'm not sure whether Jacqueline's question can be a launch point for ISAS to think about perhaps another conference that is more wide-ranging. I hope I've sort of outlined a couple of things that we need to do.
I think that's a very comprehensive answer to that question. Thank you very much, Minister. I think we have to let you go unless, it's real. Okay, you take over.
Thank you, Minister and Ambassador Pillai, for the insightful session. Thank you, Minister, once again for joining us.